Are you a man looking for an intensive program to help you overcome your sexually addictive behaviors? Gateway to Freedom is your answer. Gateway to Freedom is a 3-day intensive workshop for men seeking to overcome sexually addictive behaviors. Whether married, single, or divorced, Gateway to Freedom will help men regain hope for a new life of purity and real contentment. The workshop is conducted by experts in the field of sexual addiction recovery. Your experts have over 35 years of combined experience. Read testimonials of workshop alumni at gatewaymen.com. Get all the info and register online at gatewaymen.com or call 1-800-49-PURITY.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm the founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop. I want to personally invite you to be part of our next workshop coming up November 20th through the 22nd in Colorado. So call us today at 210-822-8201 or visit gatewaymen.com.
Welcome to Pure Sex Radio, training men, educating women. Are you ready to get real and start living each day in purity? This dynamic program is designed to educate, encourage, and equip listeners with the tools necessary for living a life of sexual purity. Pure Sex Radio brings you the best in mobile talk radio. Listen to real-life struggles, learn how to overcome lust, pornography, and sex addiction, and get serious about purity. Your hosts for Pure Sex Radio are Jonathan Doherty and Stephen Cervantes. Jonathan is the director of Be Broken Ministries and founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop for Men. Stephen is the founder of the Hope Counseling Center. Visit us online at puresexradio.com. And now, please welcome Jonathan and Stephen on Pure Sex Radio.
Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. We're glad to have you with us. My name is Jonathan. I'm here with Stephen. Stephen, how are you today?
I'm blessed. Thank you for asking.
Wonderful. Well, before we get started, I just want to let you know, as we do periodically, that we are a listener-supported broadcast, and all that means is that the way you're able to hear this program week in and week out is because there are listeners just like you who have decided to come alongside of us and partner with us in this ministry by helping support this broadcast through financial donations so that we can distribute the podcast around the world, that we can have the program on various stations around the country in the United States. And if you'd like to learn about the ways that you can partner with us, simply go to puresexradio.com and then click on the donate button. So this week, we are going to focus on one thing, and we'll see how well we do that, Stephen, because you know a lot of times we branch out into other stuff. But the one thing we're going to focus on this week is the eyes. And so we want to launch out here with a verse that might be familiar to some of you. It's a verse that's often used in relationship to the idea of keeping our eyes pure, but it comes from the book of Job in the Bible. And the verse is Job 31:1, and it simply says, "I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman." So, Stephen, there's our launching pad.
Hey, we need Job.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like perfect control 100% of the time in every situation, to never mislook. I made a covenant with my eyes to do this. We need him in here. Could somebody find Job and bring him in? We need him as an expert. So since Job isn't around, I guess it falls on you and I. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because sometimes I think I go get expert stuff and I bring in expert stuff, and then I think, honestly, we're sort of experts ourselves, having worked in this field for a long time and talked to lots of men. People actually want to hear us talk. So today you're going to have an opportunity to hear us talk. And we're going to talk about a topic that's been rolling around in my mind. in terms of always breaking down this process of managing sexuality. How does a man manage his sexuality? How do we try to step up to the gold standard that we just read from Job? It's a covenant, it's a commitment not to look. And so I was thinking it's really about the eyes, not the whole thing, but a part of the struggle has to do with the eyes. The eyes play a part of this. And what is it about the eyes? Could we just talk about eyes? Because I'll tell you the end of the discussion at the beginning. I'm asking men this question. Can you use your eyes? Can you control your eyes or manage your eyes? Pick any word you want. But can you use your eyes so that you honor yourself, so that you honor your wife? And can you use your eyes so that you honor your God?
Well, those are big questions, and I think that it's good to unpack this because, sometimes we think, oh man, if we're just going to focus on one thing, how on earth can you go that deeply into it? But it's interesting because even as we're talking about the eyes, I love the fact that the eyes themselves, even physically, biologically, they have from the beginning of time, they have absolutely fascinated doctors and scientists. In fact, even Darwin said that the eyeball was the thing that really could unravel his whole theory. because he's like, it's so complex, it's so incredible that even today there's nobody out there that could say, hey, I totally get it, even from a biological standpoint. And here we're going to try to talk about it on a multi-layered, paradigm and say, okay, let's look at it from many different angles, because let's look at it from the spiritual angle, from the emotional angle, from the physical angle. And so I think we need to understand going in that the eyes, even though we're just focusing narrowly on that, they're very complex. And that's where I would say I think there's actually two levels on which we are talking about the eyes. One is very much the physical level, meaning, okay, what are you physically seeing and physically looking at with the eyeballs, the set of eyeballs that are inside your skull. But then I think there's this other layer that happens on a whole different plane that has nothing to do with the physical eyeballs that you have in your skull. And I would call this your mind's eye.
Okay, so good. You're breaking it down into two parts, right? What's you're looking at outside, and then what happens inside.
Yeah, because I think if we were to ask all of our listeners to close their eyes, would they then be able to say, oh my goodness, there's no images, I can't see any images? No, they'd only say that on the physical level, right?
Right.
We can all daydream. We can all see images in our head without having our eyes open. And I think that's where there's certain people that want to have a kind of self-righteousness where they kind of puff their chest out and go, I don't look at pornography. I don't have any problem whatsoever. My eyes are, clean. And the problem is if we're able to get a glimpse of what their mind's eye is looking at.
Wow.
They may not be as pure and clean as they think they are.
The inside stuff and the outside stuff. So we're gonna be throwing different topics about the eye and ways to look at this on the table. And Jonathan's got one perspective and I do, and they're going to mesh together, we hope. But I want to go back to what I was saying initially, because I think we have to use our body to honor ourselves, our wife, and our God, and our hands, and our words, and our spirit, and our eyes. And so the whole point of this discussion today is if you manage yourself well, you're going to have greater inner peace. And that's sort of Jonathan was already introducing us the idea that, boy, there's a lot of stuff inside. And so eyes are good for looking outside, and eyes are sort of good for looking inside also in terms of imagination and fantasy and visualizing and those kinds of things. So the goal is always managing ourselves in a God-honoring way so that we can be at a greater rest and peace, honoring our wife, So we protect that sacredness of the union, honoring our God, because that's really what we're designed for, is to serve Him. And I appreciate the way you said this. This is an emotional discussion, a spiritual discussion, a physical, and a relationship discussion. And there's stuff going on outside, and there's stuff going on inside.
And I would like to lay the foundation, too, because I think, most of our listeners, the folks that are going to listen to this program are probably looking for some help because there's mismanagement of the eyes. There's maybe out of control, looking and lusting and staring and all these kinds of things. And we get so many guys that they come into our ministry and they say, listen, I don't even know where to begin because I can't. It's like I actually don't even realize that my head is on a swivel no matter where I go.
Right.
And so there's such a training that goes on over time that I think it's easy to begin to look at your eyes as something evil. And I want to say this, the eyes are good.
Yes.
The eyes are good. Now, it's what are we going to use them for? What are we going to allow into them? That's where we have the issue of morality come in. But I want to establish the foundation that the eyes themselves, they're good. They're a part of God's creation.
Yes.
And He said, He looked at man fully formed and He said, very good. And he had eyeballs in his head.
Then we have free will, which
right.
we have to be careful because we can use our eyeballs for good
Mm-hmm.
and make it a doorway and a sacredness, or we can use them for not good.
Well, and that gets to what you're talking about, the idea of how do we manage this part of our being in order to honor ourselves, honor our wife, and honor our God. But the mechanism itself is good. Eyes are good, and I want to kind of keep that as a central piece here. And hopefully, if you can see it that way, no pun intended, then you can start to realize that you can move to greater health in how you use this very good gift that God has given us of seeing.
Yes. And so here's a question to ask yourself. What are you doing with your eyes today or yesterday? How well did you manage your eyes, and where did you park your eyes? Because they are the doorway. So one of the things that you talked about as we were starting the program prep, you were saying, I remember the statement that Mark Laaser made. And could we go back to that? Mm-hmm. You repeat that?
Yeah, I remember years ago, Dr. Mark Laaser had come down to San Antonio to give some presentations, and I was in one of his sessions, and he made this statement. He said, actually, if you really want to learn about where you need the deepest healing in your life, you need to look into your sexual fantasies. And I about fell out of my chair.
Yes.
I'm like,
what's he talking about? What does that mean?
I'm like, I've never heard a Christian man, let alone any man in counseling or otherwise, tell me that I had to go into my sexual fantasies to understand where I needed the deepest healing. And I think what he was saying was there are themes, there are patterns, there are certain pathways that we get so trained to travel down in our, lustful behaviors that they often will lead to an originating wound, experience, trauma, any number of things that were, exposure to pornography, whatever else, that were some of these foundational elements that got us started down this path of having our head on a swivel or looking at pornography or getting into sexual relationships. And so I think what he was saying is when you've got that kind of pattern in your thoughts, which we could say these are the tapes and the videos that play in our minds, then they are speaking to you about where your deepest wounds are. And maybe rather than continuing to say, stop it, stop it, stop it, we might need to actually unpack that in order to be able to know how to heal from it so that then we actually don't go back again and again and again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
But it was very revolutionary to me. I was like, look into your fantasy.
Yes, instead of run away.
Yeah.
That's good. And so that's that inside work that we need to do. Sometimes we create videos, internal videos with themes and patterns that repeat themselves. And his point was to look at those and what are the themes of those, because those could be the doorway to healing. So we're hoping that one of our ideas catches you today on today's program and gives you sort of a foundation to launch into deeper thought. So we're talking about inner struggle with our eyes and outer struggles with our eyes. And so we appreciate Mark Laser's comment about look inside because the patterns repeat themselves and they're calling out to you, get deeper healing and quit repeating the pattern. But let's go back to using our eyes in terms of inside and outside. Well, let me make a point to build on sort of the inside again, because as you were talking earlier, I thought, let's see, I had my eyes when I was a baby and when I was a boy and then when I was a teenager and when I was a young man. And, I've had my eyes this whole journey. And what have I done with my eyes? And so when I think of my eyes, I immediately want to go back inside to whatever I've decided is the best stuff to think about over and over again.
And if you think about it, I think the most crucial stages of what we consume, I guess you would say, with our eyes is when we are younger. Because think about it, when you were a baby and a toddler and a young boy, everything you saw was new, right?
Yes. And it imprinted,
and
right?
So whether it was good, bad, or otherwise, it's such a powerful thing when you're young, whatever you see, whether that be what you see in your home in terms of the relational dynamic, what you see in your older siblings or younger siblings, what you see in the community that you grew up in, what you see in the culture that you live in. All of that is huge when you're a young kid. And that's why I think it's important what you're saying here is, you got your eyes on the whole journey. But think about it now, Stephen. Are there things that you can see now that in an instant take you back to when you were a young boy?
Yes, and I think about smells doing that and sounds that do that just immediately. And I think we're talking about the eye-brain connection now, right? Because those memories are stored in the eye and the senses invite us back to places we've been before. Some good, some not so good, right? And so we have to manage that. So I've been looking at the whole idea of when you manage your eyes, is it optional or is it a good thing to be disciplined with your eyes? Or if nobody's looking, who cares? Does it really hurt you, what you look at? Does it really negatively impact you? It's just you. Why can't you look at whatever you want? So we're talking about honoring the self or dishonoring the self. And so when you sneak around and get away and get your little thrill, did you use your eyes to honor yourself or to create dishonor and distress, and the irritability of, oh, gosh, I did it again.
And I think this is huge. And really, when you think about this idea in the culture in which we live, where self is promoted to a deity. I mean, think about it. We live in a culture that is absolutely all about the self and promoting the self as the most important thing. Hey, if it's not good for you, then don't do it. I mean, everything's about you and make sure that you are happy and you, right? And so this idea of honoring yourself is distorted in our culture. Because I think the way that typically translates in our culture is the way you honor yourself is you take. You make sure you pursue your desires. You make sure that, hey, if I want to look at that, I'm going to look at that because it's a free country. It's all about me doing what I want. And if I want to do that, I can do that. Don't you dare try to take pornography away from me. Don't you dare try to say that I can't look at certain things. And we have this type of distorted view of freedom, which says, if I want to look at lewd images 24 hours a day, I can do that. And the problem is that for those who have attempted that, and if they are honest with themselves on that journey, they would have to say, I don't feel honored in my being in how I'm managing my eyes. I don't feel like I'm actually elevating myself. I don't feel like I'm actually lifting myself up in a way that is charitable and good.
Yeah, and we're talking about honoring ourselves. It's like honoring our design, honoring our calling, honoring our role so that we can function well.
And I would say at this point, this is not a Christian, non-Christian thing. I believe this is a human thing. that regardless of anybody's religious affiliation, if they continue down a path of saying, I want to look at whatever I want to the degree that I want to look at it, I don't think you will find that person down the road in their life lifting their head and saying, I feel whole.
No, man. I've talked to many men that just feel so dirty inside because they looked and looked and looked and they never stopped and they went to the next thing and the next thing. They just have such shame and guilt and they have no peace, no rest. And that's why we're talking about managing your eyes well.
And the reason I think it's important to look at this issue of managing your eyes well in order to honor yourself is because sometimes, when we get off onto the idea of honoring God, sometimes that brings a wave of shame over people because they're like, yeah, man, I've fallen short again. I just can't. I don't measure up to God's standard, and I'm sure He's so disappointed in me. And we have all these ideas of shame that come over us. Whereas if we can say this is about both honoring God and honoring ourselves. And
honoring our wives.
Right.
I'm putting all three of them in there because if you are the kind of man that guards himself, you also protect your wife, right? And you protect your relationship with your God. So I have to kick into a little story because I have three little challenges here that I would like to put out there for guys to think about. All growing up, I'm like short, not smart. I'm not the guy. I'm the invisible guy in school. But I knew the pretty girls because I could pick them out. And when any of them smiled at me or talked to me, I mean, I was just inflated, right? I'm 6 feet tall. And so who doesn't like the pretty person talking to them and making them feel good? And so that sort of has continued from my high school on to who's the pretty girl, and if she ever looks at you and talks to you. And I realize as I've grown and mature how stupid that is. Because a lot of these girls, maybe they got a nice package, but they have their own issues, and they're just people. They're not gods. And how is it they're building my self-esteem? I'm using them to kid myself. It's like, look, my God's enough, And so I've had to, as I've gotten older, I made myself, when a pretty woman was coming around, I made myself look down. And it was very odd in the beginning because I'd practiced that looking and smiling to see if I could get a look and a smile back. And, oh, good, I'm recognized. But it's like, what, am I 16 still? Do I have to have somebody else's approval? This is an eye game that men play. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this to the rest of you guys because lots of you guys play this game. And so I want you to manage that. I want you to really think about that. Are you trying to get somebody to look at you and smile at you for approval so your eyes can meet their eyes and you can get some feeling from the moment?
And I think in that moment what you're doing is you're honoring yourself because you're recognizing, you know what, I'm trying to make this about her validating my worth.
Yes.
Instead of the reality that God has already validated my worth.
Amen. We don't hear that enough. We don't say that enough.
And it's also honoring your God too, right?
That's right.
Because you're saying, I acknowledge you have given me worth. I don't need to look here for some validation of my own worth and self-esteem. You have spoken that into my life. And I think
your wife, throw your wife in there too, right? Because if you don't take from this woman and say, look, I'm getting what I need.
And here's the other thing I think is very important. You're honoring her. See, that's one thing that sometimes we leave out because we make the image something almost non-human. We make it something kind of two-dimensional, cold. It's just a body. Instead of saying, listen, the reason I'm looking down is because I want to honor myself, I want to honor my wife, I want to honor my God, and I want to honor her. She's somebody's daughter. She is somebody's. She could be somebody's wife. She's somebody's sister. She has value and worth. That who am I to steal that away or try to manipulate some sort of response out of her to make me validated?
Yes, but it also forces you to go inside and do real work instead of pseudo work. Get a smile and feel good. That's not real work.
Right.
Do real work. Is God enough? Remind yourself. Do you need that? Do you need a fix? So there's two more that I want to go over. One is when you go to a restaurant with your wife. Can you spend most of the time looking at her? Just look at her, eat, talk, and look at your wife. Because some guys, I mean, you were talking about guys whose heads are on a swivel. You go to a restaurant, they're not looking at their wife at all. They're looking at everybody else, engaging the waiter, the waitress, the person at the door, everybody that walks by. They're looking. I mean, it's just like, that's dishonoring. When you go to a restaurant, look at your wife.
I heard a great story from one guy who came through our ministry who said, after coming to our workshop and realizing just how much he had, had his head on a swivel and all this when he was out at restaurants, he said now what he does is if he and his wife go out, he always strategically positions where he is going to sit to have the lowest view of the entire room, and so that it mainly focuses his attention. So where he's going to sit in the booth or in some way that it's more difficult for him to even see the rest of the restaurant to where he's focusing on his wife. I've also heard stories of guys they've gotten to a restaurant and there was simply too much temptation and they got up and left.
Oh, wow.
And I mean,
that's great.
That's honoring his wife. That's honoring himself.
And
it's
honoring
God.
his God. So I'm going to go into my last one. If you find yourself at a mixer or a gathering, make it a point to spend some time looking at your wife and let her catch you looking across the room at her. Just look at her and smile. And you have to do it for a while because she has to catch you, right? But that's a way to honor yourself and your relationship, to honor your wife and to honor your God. Because if you go someplace and you're consumed with everybody else, they're so important, right? You missed an opportunity for your wife to feel special. And so in a mixer, in a crowd, in a gathering, spend some time looking at your wife and smiling at her and her going, what? Why are you looking at me? What? Because that's a way to honor your wife.
Well, we've got a couple minutes left here, and so there's something else I want to share too, because this verse that we started this broadcast with was, I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. So Job is saying, I don't have some casual arrangement with my eyes. It's serious. I take what I'm doing with my eyes seriously. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, think about how we typically how we think about health in our country. And I mean, it's in some ways it's fanatical, there's all these kind of things. But we know that generally speaking, to have physical health requires a good diet and moderate exercise. So there's this combination between diet and exercise, right? What we are choosing to withhold from bringing into our bodies through diet and saying, I'm going to let these certain nutrients in my body. I'm not going to let all these other things in there. But then also what we are then doing, we are doing exercise. We're moving our joints. We are in motion. And I started thinking, how many people they make that commitment to their body, through diet and exercise, and yet they let their eyes just wander recklessly. The idea of saying, my eyes, there's no need for boundaries. There's no need. Let me just consume everything that my eyes can see. And imagine if we did that very same thing with our physical health. Hey man, whatever my taste buds like, just throw it in my mouth. Let's get it down into my stomach. We would all die very quickly of obesity. And yet somehow we have this idea that I don't have to have those same kind of parameters on my eyes. And what I've found is when you kind of have this diet exercise mentality toward your eyes, meaning, listen, I want to narrow the focus. I want to say there are only certain things that I will let my eyes see as it pertains to my sexual purity. And so since my eyes are to be focused on my wife, then everything else outside of that, that's bad nutrients. Those are not good for that's not good for my mind. It's not good for my soul. But I don't think that's just enough, the idea of just having boundaries. I think the exercise is what you were talking about, like in the mixer. Are you purposely gazing at your wife? Are you using your eyes in a way to pursue, to smile, to let her know she's the one? And I think in doing that, then you're honoring yourself, you're honoring your wife, and you're honoring God. So I would encourage listeners to think in sort of a diet and exercise mindset toward the eyes, and take this passage seriously about making a covenant. If you'd like more help on your journey with your eyes and everything else that pertains to sexual integrity, please contact us. We'd love to help, and we look forward to having you back here next week on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast.
Pure Sex Radio is paid for by Be Broken Ministries. Visit us online at puresexradio.com.